Welcome back, viewers. I'm on with Dr. Ashni Singh. He is a senior minister in the Office of the President in Guyana, responsible for finance. Welcome back to the program, Dr. Singh.
Thank you very much, Calistra. Good to be back with you.
Well, certainly Guyana has to be the envy of the Caribbean with all of that, the oil resources that you have. Every day we hear a new report of new resources being found. How is all of that being leveraged into economic benefits for the people of Guyana? How is it changing lives?
Sure. So, first of all, let me say that you are right. I mean, the news is certainly very good. And we welcome the discovery of oil and the commencement of oil production. A lot of work went into restoring Guyana's position as a viable and credible and attractive destination for investment, which of course brought international companies like Exxon to Guyana. So you're absolutely correct. Right now we have more than 11 billion barrels of proven oil reserves, and that's great news. In addition to that, the oil sector is, of course, generating rapid economic growth, and it's creating rapid opportunities. But let me say that the full impact, the full flow of resources from the oil sector is, in fact, going to come a few years down the road, because we're right now producing probably about 350,000 barrels of oil a day. But that's going to ramp up over the medium term. It's going to ramp up to about 1 million barrels a day of oil production within the decade. And once we get to that point, the resource flows are going to be far more significant than they are right now. I make that point really to say that the revenues that are being earned from the oil sector are still relatively modest, particularly when you consider the developmental needs that Guyana still has. Guyana, of course, is a very large country. It still has significant infrastructural needs, including to address issues of connectivity. Particularly for the hinterland communities, access to the hinterland communities still presents a challenge. Access to our neighbors like Brazil and Suriname is still a challenge. We don't have a bridge across the river to Suriname. We don't have an all-weather road to Brazil. And that, of course, some of those infrastructural impediments still weigh very heavily on Guyana's ability to realize its economic potential. And so what we see the commencement of oil production doing is we see it presenting us with an opportunity to remove the historic impediments to Guyana's competitiveness and sustainable growth into the long term, even into the post-oil world. And so we're using this period to address precisely those impediments, to ensure that we lay the foundation for long-term growth and broad-based growth far beyond oil and gas. So the big historic impediments to broad-based economic growth have been transport infrastructure, connectivity, roads, bridges, etc. We want to make sure that every region of Guyana has good connectivity, good roads, so that they're not constrained by the impact of being isolated geographically from the capital city and from major marketing centers. And so we're building out, or we see the necessity to build out infrastructure in the near term to address this infrastructural impediment. The second thing is cost of electricity. Electricity has historically been a big problem in Guyana. It's been a constraint to the emergence of a manufacturing sector. It's been the main reason why we have remained a producer of primary commodities and not of value-added products. We want to address this, and we are addressing this by investing very heavily in electricity, in energy generation, which will lay the foundation for a more competitive manufacturing sector. Now, those are the things, and similarly, all of the other impediments to growth. Those are the things that are important to ensure that we lay the foundation for long-term growth, for everybody to be able to benefit in the long term, and for the Guyanese economy to be more resilient, because we've seen many examples around the world of countries that were entirely dependent on oil, and if the oil price dips, or if the oil production dips for one reason or another, the country finds itself in trouble. We don't want to be in that situation. We want to make sure that in addition to oil and gas, we have a competitive agricultural sector, we have a competitive manufacturing sector, we have a competitive services sector, we have a competitive tourism sector, etc. And so first of all, we're investing very heavily in ensuring Guyana's resilience and the broad-based nature of Guyana's economic growth. That's the first point. Secondly, in the immediate term, we want to make sure that as many Guyanese people are able to participate in the oil and gas sector and in the transformation to which I referred, the investments in the other sectors to which I referred. And so for that reason, we're investing heavily in education. We want to make sure that everybody has a secondary education in Guyana and has access to technical and vocational education. We want to make sure that everybody is IT literate, that they're able to participate in, like I said, the modern economy. And we're already seeing returns to this. We already have in the oil and gas sector literally thousands of persons drawn from across the country, drawn not only from Georgetown, not only from Linden, not only from Berbice, but also Essequibo, working in the oil and directly in the oil and gas sector. The oil and gas sector already employs directly thousands of Guyanese persons, whether it is persons working on the oil rigs, whether it is persons working on the service vessels that are supporting the oil rigs and the exploration vessels, whether it's Guyanese companies working with the tier one contractors that provide things like onshore services, warehousing services, transport and logistics, advisory services, engineering services. You already have thousands of Guyanese persons working directly in the oil and gas sector. And then indirectly, you have a remarkable construction boom that is taking place. Factories, warehouses, office buildings, and residences. And that sector alone, construction alone, has also created several thousand jobs. And those jobs, again, are populated by people drawn literally from across the country. Earlier in the program, I mentioned the 1,000 Homes project in Linden. You imagine the number of jobs that constructing 1,000 homes will create in the immediate term, setting aside, of course, the social benefits to be had from 1,000 families becoming homeowners for the first time. And so there's a huge construction boom that in fact has seen a rapid escalation in demand for workers in the construction sector, engineers, architects, skilled construction workers, etc. And that's happening right now. In fact, we are having now to deal with the challenge of ensuring that enough people are trained to be able to meet the needs of these sectors. So one of the things that we've had to do as an immediate intervention is to invest very heavily in short-term training courses to make sure that these sectors have enough trained people. So we're rolling out things like training for heavy equipment operators, and we're doing those programs countrywide. We're rolling out training for people like mariners and seafarers, people who work on ships, to make sure that people are able to have the certification and are able to access those jobs. We're ensuring that people have the certification for the IT jobs, and we're doing that countrywide.
No, Dr. Singh, let me ask you, as Guyana seeks to transform itself, how do you see yourself coexisting within the CARICOM grouping? Agriculture in particular has been tricky for the smaller nations of the CARICOM Union, and a country like Guyana with vast land and the other bigger ones in South and Central America are being looked at as offshore agriculture sites. Apart from that, though, is Guyana looking at any synergies and any specific cooperation with the rest of the region as you transform?
I'm glad that you raised that. I would say not only coexistence, but Guyana is in fact a proud member of CARICOM. We were a founding member of CARICOM, and we are the seat of the CARICOM Secretariat, and we continue to be and will continue to be a proud member of CARICOM. We take our regional obligations very seriously, and we take the regional agenda very seriously. In fact, you would know, and your viewers would know, that since our government returned to office, Guyana, and in particular our president, has been given quasi-cabinet responsibility in the cabinet in the CARICOM in CARICOM's quasi-cabinet arrangement, whereby countries and in particular heads of government are assigned cabinet responsibility for different sectors. Guyana has been given cabinet responsibilities in the CARICOM quasi-cabinet for agriculture and food security. And that's not by accident. That, in fact, is because this government places the highest level of importance on agriculture and on food security. And not only on agriculture and food security from the Guyanese perspective, but on agriculture and food security from the Caribbean perspective, from CARICOM's perspective. And since Ali's assumption of responsibility for agriculture and food security, he has rolled out an extremely aggressive agenda. You would have heard, and your viewers would have heard, of the 25 by 25 program, which aims to reduce the CARICOM's food import bill, not Guyana's food import bill, but CARICOM's food import bill by 25% by 2025. And this is a regional agenda. It's an agenda that has been endorsed by CARICOM heads. It enjoys very strong support by CARICOM heads, and it involves significant regional and bilateral partnerships. We're already working very aggressively. To give you one example, we are working on a very aggressive agenda for cooperation with Barbados. Prime Minister Motley and President Ali have had several meetings, several engagements. They have exchanged several visits. The president has been to Barbados on a number of occasions, been to Guyana on a number of occasions, and we're rolling out. We have several programs that will see Guyana and Barbados in particular working closely on a number of specific interventions to accelerate the food security agenda, in the first instance involving our two countries, but open, of course, to involve as many CARICOM countries as are willing to be involved in this agenda. And so there are I could give you multiple specific examples. We have projects that we're working on things like livestock production. So we are importing black-belly sheep from Barbados. Barbados, of course, has a very resilient and popular breed of sheep, the black-belly sheep. We're importing black-belly sheep from Barbados for the purposes of large-scale breeding programs to meet the livestock needs of not only of Guyana and of the Caribbean. We're doing the same with other animals, with beef, with chicken. We are entering large-scale cultivation of corn and soybean, which ultimately we believe will meet the animal feed requirements not only of Guyana but of the rest of the Caribbean. We're working on partnerships between Barbados, Guyana, and northern Brazil. In fact, between President Ali and Prime Minister Motley, they've had engagements with colleagues on the Brazilian side of the border in the state of Roraima, and we're looking at initiatives whereby even beyond Guyana and Barbados, we can also have collaborative initiatives with the northern states of Brazil, with a view to ramping up production, improving productivity, etc.
And so, Dr. Singh, we're talking about Barbados. They are pretty strong in the region. But what about the smaller islands where imported inflation is a major problem and food security continues in day by day to become more of an elusive dream really for us?
You're absolutely correct. But what I will say is this: first of all, if we think of ourselves as a CARICOM unit, increased production anywhere in CARICOM is a good thing for all of CARICOM. So if we produce more, whether we do it in Grenada, in St. Lucia, in Jamaica, in Barbados, in Trinidad and Tobago, in Guyana, wherever, in Barbados, wherever, increased production in CARICOM is in fact a good thing in any part of CARICOM, is in fact a good thing for all of CARICOM. And that is explicitly our position, and we are willing and happy to support any and all of our sister and brother CARICOM states and partner with them in any way that we possibly can to increase production. CARICOM, as you know, is a customs union. Goods that are produced in the Caribbean have duty-free access across CARICOM within the customs union. And so we welcome and encourage increased production, and we will partner with any CARICOM member state. And we have, I only give the Barbados example because the Barbados example is such a, it's perhaps Barbados is probably the country that we have the biggest agenda for cooperation with, particularly on food security. But we similarly are open for partnerships and open for collaboration with all of our brothers and sisters across the Caribbean. And in fact, if I might, just before I hand the mic back to you, we recently held an Agri-Expo, and it was a Caribbean Agri-Expo. And we had CARICOM heads coming from multiple countries. If I'm not mistaken, I think we had about 8 or 9 CARICOM heads here, ministers, premiers, etc., participating in the Agri-Expo. And in many cases, companies or potential investors coming to this Agri-Expo, partnerships and forging partnerships that will lead to increased production across the region. And so we are open for partnership, and we actively encourage partnerships across the region, and we welcome increased production in any part of the region because we view CARICOM as a unit, a single unit.
Speaking of government partnerships, recently it was announced a government-to-government arrangement between the Guyana government and the British government. And coming out of that, we heard the announcement of visa-free travel for Guyanese into Britain. What is the essence of this government-to-government agreement? What's Guyana giving and out of it?
Well, we are collaborating on a number of fronts. To be frank with you, I mean, we spoke about the CARICOM agenda, but Guyana similarly is increasingly reaching out to all of our global partners, not only to the region, but we're reaching out to global partners around the world. We welcome international investors. We encourage them to partner with local companies. So Guyana is increasingly reaching out beyond the region. We're reaching out around the world to partners from around the world, whether it's Europe, the United Kingdom, North America, the Middle East, Asia. We are increasingly reaching out to the rest of the world and looking for partnerships, strategic partnerships. And Guyana, of course, is open for business to companies and investors from around the world once they comply with our laws and, demonstrate their bona fides as legitimate investors. Now, you mentioned the United Kingdom in particular. Guyana, of course, has a long historic relationship with the United Kingdom, like, of course, much of the English-speaking Caribbean. We have historically had strong bilateral relations with the UK. We have been building on those relations. In fact, just next week, we are going to be receiving a trade mission from the United Kingdom with companies coming from the UK looking for business and investment opportunities in Guyana. We're going to be signing next week. We expect that we will be signing next week a partnership agreement with the United Kingdom that will set the framework for increased cooperation and collaboration on economic and trade matters. So this is part of our ongoing and international engagement. The introduction of visa-free travel to Britain is something, of course, that we welcome. It improves the ease with which persons can travel from Guyana to the United Kingdom. It demonstrates a recognition in the UK of the importance of increased travel between Guyana and the UK. It came alongside, of course, not just visa-free travel, but it came also with the reintroduction of a service by British Airways to Guyana. And so we view as a government, we view these developments in the context of a broader global agenda. And that broader global agenda is one that reflects Guyana increasingly being open for business for companies from around the world, and in particular, promoting partnerships with Guyanese companies and Guyanese nationals within our local network.
Now, finally, Dr. Singh, how is Guyana responding to the rising cost of living that's impacting countries everywhere? What's your government doing about your issues there?
Absolutely. I'm glad that you asked that, because let me say this, that Guyana is not, we are very much a part of the global economic system, and we're not immune to any of these pressures. And we have had exactly the same cost of living pressures that everybody else around the world has been grappling with across the Caribbean. Brothers and sisters in Grenada and elsewhere have been grappling with these challenges. Europe, everywhere, even in the major metropolises of the world, the most advanced economies of the world, have been grappling with inflation. that in many places is the highest it has been in almost half a century. In some places, inflation is easily the highest that it has been in 4 decades. So we've had the same pressures. We have had high fuel prices as a result of escalation in world market prices. We have had food prices creeping up as a result of the problems with the global supply chain, increased freight costs, the problems in Ukraine and what that has done to wheat prices. And there's been the same kind of pass-through in Guyana as there's been everywhere else. We've been able, thankfully, to deploy a few policy instruments that we have at our disposal to be able at least to limit the impact on the domestic consumer. And so in many cases, first of all, we took off the VAT on basic food items. We took off the VAT on a number of other critical inputs like electricity, water, etc. The APNU AFC had put VAT on all of these things: food, medicine, education, etc., construction materials, etc. We took off the VAT on most basic necessities. Secondly, we use the policy levers that are at our disposal to adjust the taxes on fuel imports. So, for example, we have an excise tax on fuel that we adjust downwards when fuel prices go up. We adjusted the fuel excises. And in fact, the standard rate on gasoline and diesel is 50%. We reduced that in multiple steps from 50 to 35 to 20 to 10 and then to 0. And what that did was that it allowed the domestic consumers at the petrol station and at the pump to be able to access fuel at prices that did not reflect fully the global escalation in prices. We absorbed at the utilities, the power and water utilities, the public treasury absorbed the impact of increased fuel prices that impacted on the electricity company. Because if we were to pass on the full impact of increased fuel prices on the electricity company, if we were to pass that on through electricity tariffs might have doubled. But instead, we took a conscious decision recognizing how critical electricity is to people's disposable income, how critical the cost of electricity is to production. It's already historically been a challenge in Guyana. We took the conscious decision that the public treasury will absorb, that the public sector will absorb the cost of increased fuel prices on the electricity company and not pass that on to consumers. We did the same with the water company, etc. And so those are some examples. On the food side, of course, we did have some impact, like the wheat in particular. Wheat prices went up dramatically. Our response has been to and I should mention, we also had devastating floods in last year that impacted domestic food production. Our policy response has been to push aggressively to ramp up domestic food production, because increased production will mean increased availability of produce in the market, which in turn will mean some moderation of price increases. And we're going to continue to push
and
very
less inflation and less imported inflation as well.
Absolutely,
with all of those international triggers out there that are impacting on the cost. Well, Dr. Singh, we are actually out of time. It was my pleasure to have you with me for the last 2 segments of half an hour. Thank you so much, and I look forward to having you back on The Narrative another time. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, Calistra, for inviting me, and I'd be happy to come back again. Thanks a lot, and good to be on the program. Thank you.
This is The Narrative, and I'm your storyteller, Calistra Farrier, speaking there to Dr. Ashni Singh, who is a senior minister in the Office of the President in Guyana with responsibility for finance. The Narrative continues in a moment.